Hello, and welcome to Tampa Bay Community Network's Culture Ventures. I'm Susana Weymouth, your host. I'm the Executive Director of Tampa Bay Businesses for Culture and the Arts, and today we're going to start the show with a very special video on our TBCN Impact Award honoree, Peter Zinober. We hope you enjoy it and find it informative and interesting.
I'm Peter Zinober. I joined Greenberg Traurig with a group of lawyers from Zinober and McRae in May of 2007. I was asked to be the global co-chair of Labor and Employment and Global Human Capital. You know, there are a number of different nonprofits that we support because our lawyers have been passionate and committed to these organizations. It's a culture, it is part of our DNA, and it's one of the really wonderful things about practicing here. I started as a freshman at the University of Florida in 1960. I auditioned for and joined the symphonic band, and I was the principal euphonium from 1960 through June of 1969, which was 3 months after I had actually graduated from law school. In addition, I played French horn in the University of Florida Symphony Orchestra, trumpet in the brass choir. When I graduated, my roommate and I drove my little 1963 Volkswagen Beetle up to Washington, D.C. with every possession we owned, and I was fortunate enough to get a job with the solicitor's office at the United States Department of Labor. I had been attending George Washington University at night to get a master's degree in labor law. I really needed to round out my experience with the government by trying cases and investigating cases. And so I transferred to Tampa in January of 1972. Once I was recruited out by Carlton Fields to join their labor and employment practice, I felt that I could start to integrate into the community, and one of the first things I did was to join the Cultural Affairs Council of the Greater Tampa Chamber of Commerce. A year later, I chaired it, and they invited me to join the board of directors of what was then the Florida Gulf Coast Symphony Orchestra, which evolved into the Florida Orchestra, joined the board in 1973, and in 1981 and became the chairman of the board of the orchestra. Up until 1983, the orchestra was a per-service orchestra. The musicians all had individual contracts. There was no collective bargaining agreement or what was then called the master agreement. We were able to negotiate a collective bargaining agreement to solve the 1983 strike, which provided weekly salaried opportunities for all of the musicians, the full-time contracted musicians of the orchestra. Two of the things that I wanted to accomplish as chairman of the board of the orchestra were to develop, to create a Hillsborough County youth orchestra and to create a Florida orchestra music education program that was national in reputation. I've served 2 6-year terms on the City of Tampa Public Art Committee. I served an 8-year term as a member of the Hillsborough County Arts Council. Cynthia is the executive director of the Henry P. Plant Museum. She's held that position for 27 years. She had been in the arts. She had actually worked at the Florida Orchestra. She is passionate about the arts, the visual arts, the performing arts. She has served on a number of different boards. Matter of fact, our art collection is largely the result of her good taste. She's much more of an expert in that than I am. You know, there are a lot of wonderful leaders in the community who have done great things, and I created a term Don't share it with anybody else, it's mine. Mega visionary. And what is a mega visionary? Well, let me illustrate it by telling you who falls into that category from my standpoint. Jeff Finnick, Judy Lisi, Tom James, Lorna Taylor, George Perez. The reach, the impact extends well beyond their own organizations, their own spheres. They affect everybody. They affect not just a fairly limited reach, but they affect a whole community. We have a job to do. We have people in our midst who are mega visionaries, who are affecting the future of our community for 50 or more years going forward. Our challenge is to continue to be missionaries and to spread the word, if you will, spread the gospel about this, and we can do our part to make sure that the arts are an integral part of the evolution of these different areas of the region. It's just inspiring.
We hope you liked that video. Today, we'd like to welcome our special guest, Peter Zinober of Greenberg-Traurig. Peter, welcome to Tampa Bay Culture Ventures.
Thank you, Susanna.
Peter, you, as we've just heard and learned in the video, are a very accomplished musician. In fact, you were a musical prodigy when you were young. You still play your euphonium and other instruments in a band, I believe. Can you tell me, since you're also an extremely successful and accomplished lawyer, how do you feel that your musical training has influenced the way that you have reached the highest levels of success in the law?
I think that my musical training and my interest in the arts generally have impacted my practice in two ways. One, the arts inspire a level of creativity that is very unique and different from the practice of law. The practice of law relies on precedent, on following things that happened in the past because they happened in the past. Judges really like that idea. It's a principle called stare decisis. You follow the law that's been established by the courts in the past. With the arts, you're looking to break with tradition. You're looking to do something unique, something different, something creative, and I find that in representing my clients, that what sets me aside or apart from many other lawyers is the innovation, is the creativity that I bring to the practice in terms of designing solutions for problems and coming up with strategies to handle cases in court. That's the first. The second is a sort of an obvious benefit connection, if you will, and that is that over a career of 9 years at the University of Florida, during which I played principal euphonium in the symphonic band, I toured with the symphonic band around the state as the featured soloist on 3 years. And I also was a soloist in front of the band at different times during that period. And even Vladimir Horowitz got butterflies before he came out on the stage to do a piano recital, so I read. And the nervousness, the apprehension that you feel going out on a stage and playing before 2,000 or 3,000 people in front of an orchestra or in front of a band is a bit daunting. And during the course of my musical career, I did that a number of times. And so when I appear before a jury or before a judge, it's very much the same experience. You have to anticipate how you will feel and how you will react performing, because in reality, presenting a case before a jury or before a judge is performance art. And you have to feel comfortable coming up with a performance that is convincing and exciting and then very often with a jury entertaining.
Peter, that's fascinating. So through your music, do you feel that you honed those communication skills, those presentation skills that then translate very easily into your practice of law, particularly when you're presenting before judge and jury?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Those presentation skills were definitely developed and honed in the performance process. I also taught music to different types of individuals. For instance, while I was in college, one of the ways that I made money was giving recorder lessons to med students.
To med students?
At $10 a half an hour.
Wow.
Not very expensive, but that was an interesting experience. And again, being a teacher or a professor is very much like being a performer. You're trying to encourage, inspire, excite your audience, whether it's one person sitting across from you with an alto recorder, or whether it's 2,000 people in the War Memorial Auditorium in Fort Lauderdale.
So Peter, this is fascinating about the types of skills that you have honed. And then I don't know if you had a chance to read the latest survey that was done on the top soft skills that are being sought by employers today. And number one is the creative skills. Can you tell us a little bit, because you've got Greenberg Traurig has how many offices around the world?
39.
39. So you're one of the largest international law firms, and here you've got the beautiful office, and I'm sure that you try to attract the best and the brightest to the practice of law with you. Are those the types of skills that you look at in new employees? Does creativity come into it? How do you rank that?
When I interview candidates for positions as lawyers, one of the things that is very important to me is the kinds of interests that these candidates have that go beyond the practice of law. We get a lot of very talented candidates who have done wonderful things that are related to the practice of law. But what I really like to see is the kinds of volunteer activities, whether it's painting, whether it's music, whether it's theater, because to me it represents a different part of the brain that's been activated in these people, and that adds meaning to their lives. So I really value the creative part of a candidate's background when I interview that candidate.
Well, we'll go back to Greenberg Traurig in a minute, but you just hit on something very important, which is talking about the volunteering, and particularly volunteering, for instance, with the arts. And gosh, you have been doing that for so many decades. You're past president of TBCN and currently on the board, but you've also served on the board of the Hillsborough Arts Council, and you've been involved with the Straz, and you were instrumental, as we learned in the video, in the early days, and really the success of the Florida Orchestra today, in no small part thanks to you. So what drives you to serve, to lend such volunteer hours and service and support to these arts-related boards?
Well, I think that everybody should contribute to his or her community. My area of interest has always been the arts, but that's not the only way to contribute. There are many other ways to contribute. So I don't want to preclude the kinds of involvement that other people have in education, in healthcare, in United Way. Those are all extremely important. It's just that my background has been very arts focused, and so it was very comfortable for me to become involved in the arts. And it was also somewhat of a convenience, because when I came to Tampa and I was looking for things to do, I transferred here with the federal government, so there weren't too many things that I could do. But when I went into private practice a year and a half after I left the federal government, I looked around for things that would be fun, because you should have a passion for what you do. You should love the things you do. You shouldn't be doing them simply because you're trying to get a line on your resume or you're trying to meet important people. I realize that there are those who get involved in activities for those reasons. But with me, it was simply the fun of it. So one of my classmates at the University of Florida Law School was Bruce Smathers, who at the time that I transferred back to Tampa was the Secretary of State. And there was a vacancy for the State Arts Council representative for Hillsborough County. And I called Bruce and I said, Bruce, he knew that I was involved in the arts at the University of Florida. I was tapped into Florida Blue Key for a concentration in music performance. And so people knew that that was an area of involvement that I had. And I said, Bruce, if you don't have anybody else in mind, would you consider me for the State Arts Council position for Hillsborough County? Mm-hmm. And he was glad to do it. And I served in that capacity for 4 years. And it was a wonderful opportunity to learn about arts organizations all over the state and how they functioned and how they presented and how they used the money that they were given by the state. And I had a chance to become the vice chairman in my last year and to get to know especially the organizations from Hillsborough County. And Margie Miller from the Contemporary Art Museum at the University of South Florida introduces me at events that she speaks at very often as the person who was responsible for getting her first state grant, which, by the way, that she was one of the most talented and brilliant professionals in her field, and so I can't possibly take credit for getting that grant. That was all Margie, but she's very generous in giving credit, and so it was an opportunity to participate in a discipline that I really didn't know that much about, in this case, visual arts.
Well, and speaking of the visual arts, let's jump ahead to that because Margaret Miller was actually our guest at our most recent Culture Ventures show. And so you're correct, she is the director of the Institute for Research in Art and Contemporary Art Museum and also Graphic Studio over at USF. And I know that you and your beautiful wife, Cynthia Gandy Zinober, who is the executive director of the Plant Museum at the University of Tampa, are strong supporters of CAM and Graphic Studio, and that, in fact, you've built up quite your own personal art collection. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, we combined our lives and our possessions, including our art collections, 6 years ago when we married. Cynthia and I have known each other and been friends since 1967 when we met at the University of Florida. Wow. And our paths have crossed many times because we served on the Hillsborough Arts Council together for many years. We each served 2 terms on the City of Tampa Public Art Committee. And I will have to say, Cynthia's art collection was much more prestigious than my art collection. I tend to collect things that I like a lot, and Cynthia knew what she was doing. I just simply collected what I enjoyed, and somehow or other the collections meshed and went well together, and she remains the curator of our collection. Do
you have a favorite artwork in your collection, Peter?
My favorite, personal favorite, is a self-portrait done by an artist, a local artist in St. Petersburg by the name of Jack Ellis. Mm-hmm. And it is a remarkable piece of original art that's done with colored ink, colored pencil, and pastels. I believe that he has a show, a one-man show, at the Dunedin Fine Arts Center. And I would encourage anyone who can to go over and see his work because it's remarkably original and creative. And it so happens that when I sit, it is hung over my piano in our music room.
Ah, how brilliant.
And so when I sit at the piano and I practice my various instruments, I have a chance to look at Jack, who is actually dressed as some sort of a Renaissance jester in the self-portrait. He didn't want to paint himself as he is. I think he wanted to paint himself as he wanted to be.
So Peter, I know that you have such great relationships throughout the greater Tampa Bay area. You just mentioned Mr. Tom James. Whom else do you think is at the forefront right now in terms of leadership, really advocating for the integration of arts and culture and the importance of the arts?
Well, one of my longest time and best friends in this area is Marshall Rousseau, who's actually retired now. But I will tell you that he is a giant in the fields of arts and culture and museums. Marshall and I started at the Florida Orchestra when he was the vice president of Robinson's department store. He became the chairman of the board of the Florida Orchestra after my term as chairman. Then he became the executive director of the Florida Orchestra.
And then he went to the Dali, right?
Then he went to the Dali Museum as their CEO. Then he retired, or at least he thought he was retiring. The problem that Marshall has is he always thinks he's retiring, but other people won't let him do it. He was offered the position as interim CEO of the Tampa Museum, which he graciously declined. And then he promptly was asked to be the CEO of the Ringling, which he accepted. He teaches arts management at Eckerd College. And he is everyone's favorite sounding board for how to do things correctly with an arts institution. He is just one of many. I think that if you look at the major corporations in our area and compare their support today with their levels of support 30 years ago, it is dramatically different. That our major corporations in the Tampa Bay area have stepped up and have been willing to contribute at a financial level that 30 years ago would have been unheard of with these same companies. But I think that your senior level leadership, whether it's Duke Energy in St. Petersburg,
or TECO here,
Verizon, your major companies. The major law firms in this area have been spectacular in supporting the arts and culture. The Tampa Bay Times is a season sponsor of the Florida Orchestra season. All you need to do is to go to the various arts venues, like, for instance, the American Stage, and take a look at who sponsors their season. Free Fall Theater.
And over here, the Straz and also the Tampa Bay Museum of Art, as you say.
Yes.
Well, Peter, we're just going to wrap up with one question, which is that how do you think, I know that you have been a longtime advocate for arts and culture as a driving force, as an economic engine in our community. How do you think that we can encourage more people to be leaders like you, business leaders who have espoused the arts, advocated for the arts, supported the arts through the different organizations? How can we get more people like you to get on board with this very important issue?
I think it's important for businesses to encourage their employees, their executives, their professionals to become involved and to support them financially in their involvement. Very often when a young professional or a young executive starts a career, he or she thinks that the only thing open to them is to work enormous numbers of hours in order to generate a lot of income and to get ahead. And I think that the culture of a company always starts at the top. And if it's important, and we have some executives in our community who not only talk the talk, but walk the walk. People like Tom James, for instance, who just built a museum to house his wonderful collection of art. And Susana's husband was the architect who brought this into fruition. And I think that when you have executives to whom it's a very important value of the company to support the arts, to support culture, and to become involved in arts organizations, then I think that that will happen, because the culture always filters down from the top. It's not a ground-up experience.
Well, we're very grateful to you and to your leadership, Peter, because certainly when we honored you as Impact Award honoree, it was because you're a stellar example of that type of support for the arts. So thank you so very much for that.
You're welcome, Susana. It's been certainly my pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Susana Weymouth. This is Tampa Bay Community Network's Culture Ventures. Join us for our next show.